far-reaching piece of legislation, though as far as prison reform in particular is concerned, we have to infer quite a lot of the detail from the white paper, because as others have said, the bill is relatively thin on detail. But like others, I too very much welcome the establishment of a new statutory purpose for prisons. But I also hope that as we take the bill through this House and the other place, that there will be opportunities to strengthen and extend it. The Prison Reform Trust have suggested that the statutory purpose should make explicit reference to standards of fairness and decency. And given the problems that we face in our prisons today, the exceptional amount of time that prisoners are spending in cells, not engaged in purposeful activity, the disturbances that have put prisoner and staff safety at risk, and the appalling mental health of many of those in our prisons, I very strongly endorse the need for a purpose that captures those elements of fairness and decency. And like many honourable members who've spoken today, I express particular concern at the need for good mental health care. At least 3 to 4% of prisoners have a psychotic illness, 10 to 14% a major depressive illness, and up to 2/3 a personality disorder, according to the Royal College of Psychiatrists. Many prisoners are so unwell that prison is utterly the wrong place to treat them. And I myself, Madam Deputy Speaker, have seen this very starkly in handling a constituency case over the past few months, a case that is really showing that the system doesn't work to ensure that prisoners' mental health is paramount. This is a case of a young man accused of very serious offences and who has been on remand in Manchester prison since before Christmas. He's seriously psychotic, and prison probably is not the right place for him ever to have been sent to. And yet still, 4 months on, no secure hospital bed has been found where he can be securely and appropriately cared for. So I very strongly endorse the call of my right honourable friend, the member for Camberwell and Peckham, that we should have statutory time limits in the bill in relation to the length of time that someone who is so unwell could be kept in prison. I think it's a very important measure that we need to take to ensure parity of esteem between mental health and physical health exists in our prisons, as it does more widely in our healthcare system. Madam Deputy Speaker, we also know that women in custody have a high incidence of mental health problems, and this year we mark the 10th anniversary of Baroness Corsten's seminal report into women in custody, and a real opportunity, I think, to make a step change in the way in which we deal with women in the penal system. The Justice Secretary said that she intends to bring forward a strategy in relation to women in the next few weeks, and I very much look forward to looking at that and debating it with the government. Can I say to ministers, I hope that the government will take this opportunity not simply to build more new women's prisons far from home and too large to provide the right regime for the particular needs of women. Baroness Corsten suggested the need for small, local, secure units, not prisons, but those that very particularly catered for the needs of women. And this is such an important and once-in-a-generation chance for ministers really to transform the nature of the women's estate, and I really hope they will not miss this opportunity. I'm also concerned that the government seems intent on new large male prisons, such as Berwyn, which I understand is to have a population of 2,000 prisoners. Yet there's quite a lot of evidence of smaller prisons doing better, according to the Centre for Social Justice, the Prison Reform Trust, which showed that prisons with fewer than 400 prisoners were more likely to perform well than those with more than 800, and the National Audit Office, whose 2013 report showed that smaller prisons achieved better internal performance ratings. What I think we don't know is whether there's a difference in reoffending rates between smaller and larger prisons. I'll be very grateful to hear if anyone in the House can enlighten me on that. If we don't have that information, can I very strongly urge ministers to conduct a programme of research to understand that? What we do know, and my right honourable friend, the member for Delden, referred to this in some detail, is the importance of family contact. And incarceration a long way from home naturally makes that more difficult. According to a 2008 study for the Ministry of Justice, family contact reduces recidivism. by 39%. That's a substantial reduction. While a joint report from Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Prisons and the Youth Justice Board found that boys who suffered from emotional or mental health problems were less likely to usually have a visit at least once a week from family and friends than those without mental health problems. Yet half of women and 1/4 of men on remand receive no family visits. So concentrating prisoners in larger prisons further from home, covering large geographical areas, is going to work against the family contact that can make such a difference. And of course I'll give way to my honourable friend.
I totally and utterly endorse all of this speech that sets out so tragically the fact of women in prison and the difficulties of maintaining their family contact, and how often their children end up in care or farmed out to family members who can't travel the long distance. Particularly if you're a Welsh woman, you have to travel into England to get to see your mum in prison, and actually damages the family cohesion that we know is so vital in terms of rehabilitation.
Well, I completely agree with my honourable friend, and we know that particularly for women in custody, women who are usually the main carers of children, the consequences can be devastating, not just for those women, but for the children, who ought to be our paramount consideration. And actually, I support calls which have been put forward by the Prison Advice and Care Trust and others, that it should be a requirement on sentencers specifically to ask about provision for the children of parents who are about to be sentenced to custody, particularly to know where they will spend that first night as their parent faces incarceration. Finally, on prisons, Madam Deputy Speaker, if we're serious about prison reform, I believe we have to face the fact that our fundamental problem is sentencing policy. We incarcerate too many people who don't need to be there, it costs a great deal of money, and on release too many resume offending. I could not agree more with the Lord Chief Justice, who told the Select Committee last November that the focus needs to be on more rigorous, more demanding, effective community penalties. But that requires those penalties to be available. It requires sentencers to have knowledge of and confidence in them, something that cuts to magistrates' training budgets, lack of full pre-sentence reports because of pressures on the National Probation Service, and problems with the community rehabilitation companies leave lacking. Madam Deputy Speaker, I also want to comment very briefly on the extensive proposals in the bill in relation to court reform, and in this regard I declare to the House my interest as a life member of the Magistrates Association. While I recognise the opportunities that modern technology can offer to an efficient court system, I also echo concerns that have been expressed about how vulnerable users will fare in a virtual system. The virtual courts pilot of several years ago offers us very little reassurance, and the impact assessment that the government has produced to accompany this bill tells us, frankly, Madam Deputy Speaker, nearly nothing. Yet there are real concerns highlighted by Transforming Justice, among others, about the lack of access to legal advice, the impact on lawyer-client relationships, the impact on sentencing. It seems from the virtual courts pilot there may be some inflationary impact, the fairness of the process, public perception, and the cost to the public purse, which the impact assessment is quite vague about. And I share the concerns of the Magistrates Association and others regarding the use of online courts in relation to pleas, remand, sentencing, and for vulnerable young people. Significant numbers of those in prison have very low levels of literacy, numeracy, or suffer from learning disabilities, and will struggle to present their case in the best possible light. They may agree to their case being dealt with in writing or online because it's quicker, it gets it over with, because it's suggested to them by a police officer in a police station, but that doesn't necessarily serve the best interests of justice. And I also understand the arguments which the Honourable Member for Huntington, who's not currently in the Chamber, made about the loss of the local justice area being an opportunity for a unified magistracy and judiciary. But I would say that there are advantages too to local justice, and as the Justice Select Committee identified on its report in the magistracy last year, that loss of the local justice area must not mean losing the leadership, the peer support which helps a bench to function collectively more effectively and efficiently, and I hope the Minister will be able to reassure us. May I conclude with just a couple of remarks on the other reforms proposed to civil justice. I endorse the concerns expressed about the proposals on whiplash and the small claims route, and I really regret that the government hasn't taken the opportunity to be much more assertive in its approach to tackling the aggressive marketing practice of some of the claims management companies. And I also endorse the concerns raised by my right honourable friend, the member for Dillon, in relation to the rise in the small claims limit and the impact that may have on workers in relatively low-paid employment with modest claims for accidents at work who could now find themselves unable to access the legal advice that enables them to make claims successfully. And USDA, a trade union of which I'm a member, has offered a number of examples where relatively minor accidents, but which are significant to those on minimum wage jobs, would not have secured compensation under the changes that the government proposes because of the lack of access to legal help for them to pursue their cases. And can I finally say that I'm also concerned about one aspect of the proposals to move responsibility for employment tribunals to the Ministry of Justice. In doing so, I hope that we will not lose the real value that comes from having expert tribunals made up of representatives both of employers and of trade unions and employees, as well as the trained judiciary. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, like other speakers, I welcome this bill. There's much to progress in it that I look forward to seeing developed, but I hope that ministers will take very seriously the concerns that are being expressed to ensure that the justice system that we are so proud of in this country remains the best in the world and the most modern in the world as a result of the reforms being brought forward.